a spontaneous and unrehearsed interview.
Hello, and welcome to the 94th episode of Curiosityness. I'm Travis DeRose, the host of the show, Curiosityness, which again is the show you're listening to, and this is a fun episode. This one is great. So I have on Dylan Taylor-Lehman. He is the author of a book called Sealand, the true story of the world's most stubborn micronation and its eccentric royal family. So this is a true story about Sealand. If you've never heard of Sealand, buckle up because it's a fun story. So what Sealand is it's a small fort built during World War II off the coast of the UK. And there's a whole story, but essentially this guy, Roy Bates, hopped onto Sealand and hopped onto the fort and claimed it as Sealand, which is its own territory. He said it's its own territory, its own country. Sealand became a country, and they have currency, they have postage, they have all kinds of stuff. It's such a fun, crazy story. It's crazy that it hasn't been made into a movie yet. So you're really gonna love this. I mean, there's just so much that I could say that we're gonna learn. But Roy Bates, the guy who did all this, is just a crazy guy, and Dylan does a great job of diving into this and explaining everything on a fun level that makes it easy to understand. But it's just a really exciting story. So that's enough. Let's get to the episode. All right, we're rolling. How you doing, Dylan?
Fantastic. Thanks again for having me here.
Yeah, heck yeah. Super. I'm so excited to talk to you because this book, man, this story is just like, it's such a fun story. I've been telling all my friends and family about this thing, and they're pretty stoked to hear this conversation that we're about to have. So not to hype it up too much, but
Yeah,
should be good.
I know I have to make sure I fulfill what you're looking for.
Yeah, that's right, man. But I mean, there's no way this thing could disappoint. It's just such a fun, interesting story, and
Sure.
I'm thankful to you for writing a book about it and sharing it. So thank you.
Yeah, it's a story I've been interested in kind of following from afar for quite a while. So, needless to say, being able to write perhaps the authoritative history of Sealand is definitely a dream come true. So, yeah, it's been a very cool project for sure.
Yeah, I was kind of, I couldn't believe I had never really heard of it. Like, it seems like I would have come across it at some point in my life.
I guess maybe I'm kind of biased just because I've kind of been living in a Sealandic headspace for a while, but I am kind of surprised that it isn't more widely known, just given, kind of how outrageous its history is. So,
yeah,
I'm always, it's cool to know when someone does know about it because you can kind of, bro down a bit about this weird hidden little country.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's so fun. I mean, you just bring it up, and I've just been, bringing up the story to everybody, and everyone has so many questions of like, well, how the hell did they get this fort? How did they just get on there? How do they have currency? There's so many questions. So.
Yeah, I mean, that was definitely the impetus to write the book because it's the same sort of thing. I just immediately had, down to the most minute details, how they pulled this off. So again, being able to see that firsthand and really have license to bug them pretty extensively for those little details has been cool too.
Right. So were you able to contact like the Bates family to get some interviews or talk to them?
Yeah, I mean, once I should say first that Prince Michael has self-published his own book. And so I was very wary of like stepping on their toes and didn't want it to make it seem like I was trying to like usurp their story.
Right.
And so they were initially a little bit hesitant to work with me for exactly that reason. But Michael's book is kind of a more firsthand account. It's an autobiography. And so I kind of pitched this as like a journalistic counterpart to it, where I would provide some of the context that, he didn't have room for in his book and kind of expand on all these crazy other side stories that just, didn't really fit with his book. And so I think, looking at it like that, they were a little more keen to participate. Plus, I bugged them essentially for like 2 years about it. So, they saw that I was, pretty diligent, and my my intentions were pure. So we eventually, once I was like, hey, by the way, I'm coming to England pretty soon, they were happy to talk with me.
Right. Cool. Well, no, that's good to hear that you sort of have their blessing, with this book.
Although, the first thing that Prince Michael said to me when I met him, you open the door to his apartment and he's like, my nemesis. And so, that was a bit intimidating, but it was all in good fun. So, once we got that out of the way, it was pretty smooth sailing from there.
Yeah. He seems like a rough, meeting him would be a little intimidating.
Yeah, I didn't really know what to think. I mean, because, certainly anyone who knows about Sealand, they kind of have he's this larger than life character and this really kind of burly dude. But and that certainly came through because, I mean, he and his family are professional fishermen outside of Sealand. So,
sure,
obviously that's a pretty demanding profession. But no, they again were very gracious in hosting me, allowed me to pick their brain about all kinds of stuff, showed me some old artifacts and photos. So yeah, it was a really cool experience being able to meet them a couple of times, actually.
Cool, man. Very fun. So did you get to go out to Sealand?
Yeah. So what ended up happening was, of course they get bugged for visitors to be able to go out there all the time. So I didn't, I wanted to not be that guy where the first thing I asked was going out there, but it just so happened that when I was, I went to the UK to do this research I was trying not to get my hopes up in terms of being able to visit out there. But in speaking with them, and then his sons came over one day to speak with me as well. And they sort of offhandedly were just like, oh, did you want to go to Sealand, by the way? And I was like, yes,
hell
actually.
Yeah.
So it just so happened that they live about 2 hours away from the easiest port to get to Sealand. And we were going, my girlfriend and I, who went with me, we were going to go to this small town about 2 hours away to do research anyway and just stare at Sealand from the horizon or from the shore because you can see it on the horizon. But also the caretakers who take care of Sealand leave from there. And they were, I think, 2 days after I met with the Prince Michael's sons was when they were switching out the caretakers. So they're like, by the way, if you go to this little town, you can catch a ride on this fishing boat out to Sealand. And it just all happened to work out. And so, I tried to keep my cool when I was talking with them. But again, that just somebody was looking out for me there because it all just fell into place pretty readily, which, obviously made the book a million times better and just, lifetime ambition fulfilled for me.
Right.
Definitely.
Yeah. It's after reading the book and, learning about them so much, it's like going to Disneyland, it's great.
Yeah. As I might have mentioned in the book, it's I've been studying this for so long that I could kind of see the layout and just felt like I knew the place. But of course, being there is a totally different experience altogether. But yeah, it was stepping into a dream for sure.
Right. Sure. Okay. Well, I think we should dive into the story now because people.
Yeah. Of course.
There'll be an intro on here, so people listening should know kind of the overall story. But we're talking about all this stuff, but people don't even know it. So let's dive into it. This all starts with a man named Roy Bates, right?
Yeah, Roy Bates, and I wish I could have met him because he definitely is just this character from a bygone era. But he was a World War II vet. Really, he'd seen a lot of action there. Been on all these crazy adventures. At one point said he enjoyed being in the war, which is kind of hard to imagine. But coming home to the UK once World War II came to an end, it was hard to find a profession that fulfilled the excitement that he was used to. And so fortunately, these old forts, which were built to shoot down incoming Nazi bombers during World War II, again, you could see these from the horizon from where he lived. And so that sparked, a new plan for him that just led probably where, to somewhere he didn't even anticipate.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk about those forts then. So these were built for World War II?
Right. Yeah. There are two sets of two different designs of these forts designed by the same guy named Guy Moncel. And they're pretty strange looking structures. His favorite medium was concrete, and he built and designed all kinds of just really intense, brutalist structures, including concrete boats, which was pretty astounding to me that you could do that. But the idea was to create these stationary forts kind of in the middle of the sea, again, to shoot down bombers, submarines, in an area that they probably wouldn't expect it. And this was at the height of the Blitzkrieg, so it was a pretty critical defense. And so what he did, he came up with this crazy design where these two hollow concrete pillars built on a hollow concrete pontoon with a metal superstructure bridging them across the top. They floated them out to where they wanted them to be in the ocean, and then filled the lower pontoon with water, so they sank in place, creating these stationary forts that stuck out of the water.
Right. And so they're just sitting on the ocean floor?
Yeah, I mean, at that part of the North Sea, that part of the North Sea isn't particularly deep. So yeah, they're straight up just sitting on the ocean floor and stick up about 40 to 60 feet, depending on the tide.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. And then there was a story of them sinking one of them, or the first one, I think, and it just went they sunk one and it just got super crooked or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, when it would flood, it would, the water would kind of go to one side, so it would list, and one half would sink, and then the other half as it all filled up. And they hadn't tested this out before, and they had soldiers on these forts as they were sinking them. So yeah, when the pontoon started filling and it just sort of leaned over very precariously, I'm sure that was a just terrifying experience, but it all sank without issue, and they were able to replicate that with the other forts.
Good. Yeah, this got a little dicey there. But then these things they had people living on them, and they had artillery on them and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, and I think the thing that might surprise people about Sealand, what would become Sealand, the world's smallest country, is just how relatively small these forts are. I mean, the superstructure on the top, I think it's like maybe 2 tennis courts side by side, and the circular pontoons that are hollow with all the 7 layers of rooms in them are probably no more than, I would say, probably 20 feet across. So altogether, it's little more than probably a big house. But they did have 120 Marines living out there at a time, which was not only was there really no easy way on or off, but it's just incredibly claustrophobic too. Right.
Yeah. So this is it, right?
Yeah. That's one. There are 4 of these forts. That was previously known as Ruff's Tower before it was rechristened Sealand. But those are 4 of the Moncel naval forts.
Yeah, man. Yeah, look at that thing. It's just. It's literally just 2 columns with a platform on top, super simple, but that's all they needed it to be for this fort.
Right. And they, of course, had anti-aircraft guns and other pieces of weaponry up there. And, as I mentioned, I think, being out there really drove home again just how relatively small these forts are. And the walkways going between the levels are probably no more than, I would say, 3.5 feet wide. So, and the stairs are incredibly steep. So you're under the surface of the water in these essentially a concrete tomb with no way up aside from a super steep and super skinny set of metal stairs, which was just again, I mean, you're out there getting in fights with, airplanes. If that thing blows up and you're under there, you're done for. I mean, that was genuinely pretty. I'm not especially claustrophobic, but that was pretty intense.
Yeah, man. Yeah, and these the rooms, because people would sleep in those columns, and there's no windows, there's nothing.
Right, and that's what you can hear the water lapping against the side of it, which is kind of a cool sound. But again, I mean, being under there, and one of them. Above one of the columns is the generator with it's a huge diesel generator. And so if that exploded and something caught on fire, it's like hard to even think about, really.
Oh man. So for the way they would just build these things of like, almost zero regard for the safety of people out there,
Right. And, being out there was pretty mind numbing. And so people would, start to go a little stir crazy. So that from what I read, the commanding officers would make people take up hobbies and, do things to keep their mind stimulated so they didn't completely lose it while they were out there.
Right. Yeah. And then how many people did you say would stay on these when they were used as forts?
Up to 120.
Holy crap.
Yeah. It's like I had a hard time even kind of imagining where all those people would be at, because I guess some people would just have to kind of, you'd be in one place. So maybe that's in one of the columns, like tending to, I don't know, whatever you'd be doing in these various levels.
Right. Jeez, man. And then, and then all these things are all just like off the shore of England. They're pretty close to England.
Yeah, a couple of them have since collapsed. One of them was blown up by the government, so no one else would take over these forts.
Right.
And then the other set of forts is a different construction. They look like those creatures from War of the Worlds, these kind of tall, spindly, or AT-AT walkers from like Star Wars. And those have also kind of fallen apart, though some of them are still standing, albeit, fairly bad shape after, 78 years.
Yeah, right. Yeah, damn, these things are pretty old when you think of it like that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Man, okay. So should we talk about pirate radio now?
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, so can you give me an overview of just, what that is, how it all started?
As mentioned, Roy Bates, was kind of looking for a more adventurous life to lead, money-making venture than the various kind of projects he was involved with, which were pretty interesting in their own right, like a rubber fin factory and harvesting whiteweed, this kind of strange plant-like thing that's used in bouquets. But at any rate, at the same time in the UK and starting in the 1960s, there was this pirate phenomenon called pirate radio, because the BBC was the only licensed radio broadcaster in the UK at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Seriously, like there were no other radio stations on the airwaves, which again is kind of hard to even wrap your head around. But that meant that listeners were, of course, at the mercy of whatever the BBC wanted to play. And although they were known to play a few kind of pop programs here and there, there definitely wasn't any sort of consistency. And so to get around that, all of these enterprising young rock and rollers took to the water and built radio stations on old ships or on these forts, which were perfect for that. Yeah. And so they started doing these pirate broadcasting, which became huge cultural phenomenon. I mean, like the Beatles recorded greetings for some of the bigger stations. I mean, and ultimately, some fairly substantial amounts of money were involved because, again, this was like the only other alternative, and it was playing the most popular music of the day. So it got to be a pretty well-regarded phenomenon, not to say nothing of just how fun it must have been to be kind of engaged in this like Robin Hoodian type pursuit. And so all that to say, Roy Bates, who wasn't even necessarily a fan of rock and roll, still, of course, caught wind of this and took it upon himself to put together his own radio station. And as it happened, he lived not far from some of these forts, realized that it would be the perfect headquarters for an offshore station, theoretically outside of British jurisdiction. And so that's what, he muscled his way onto one of these forts. And that's where Radio Essex began, which is what he called his station.
Right. And then so was the reason that they would do these offshore or on a ship or something just because if they were broadcasting from England, they would just be shut down? Right.
I mean, there were a few laws on the books that gave, of course, British authority to govern their airwaves within British jurisdiction. At the time, though, the territorial limit for any country was about 3 miles. And so since some of these forts were 3 or more miles out to sea, the thinking was that, of course, we're in international waters, but close enough to broadcast, so it's a perfect space. And same thing with the ships. Obviously, we'll just sail beyond this limit and broadcast there, and there's nothing they could do. The British authorities could do about it.
Okay. So what? Yeah, like, because that seems like, I get that thinking, but to me, like, what was England's thought on it? Because it seems like they're, maybe you're broadcasting from here, but you're throwing your signal into our airspace.
Exactly. I think initially, and some of the paperwork related, or the communiques in the British archives relating to Sealand touched on this. It's like, wait a second, how do we handle this? Because they genuinely are in international waters, but like you said, they're broadcasting into the UK. So what do we do about it? And so there were a couple of years of like head scratching, or at least, fairly, definitely some penalties given to these DJs, but nothing too serious. But then one DJ killed another, and there were fights on these forts for control of them, which seemed, starting to get a little hairy. And so the British government ramped up its efforts to clamp down on this. And so they passed some laws that made, funding one of these stations a crime, supplying them with equipment or food or fuel. The listeners' contracts with the BBC, you could buy BBC transmitters, allowed theoretically the government to confiscate it if they found out you were listening to illegal stuff. So although they couldn't do anything to stop people from broadcasting in international waters, there were other ways to get at them that didn't require the government to go out into international waters. So they really seized on that to try to stop this. Okay.
No, that makes sense. So they kind of were able to indirectly kind of at least limit them.
Right.
Okay. And then so these forts are just like, after the UK was done using them, they're just kind of sitting there vacant.
Right. And that factored into the somewhat confusing state of affairs as to who had control of them, because theoretically, if you build something in international waters, you're obligated to dismantle it once you're done. Since some of these forts were in international waters and the UK left them there, were they at fault somehow? And, kind of had to deal with the consequences. But on the other hand, it's like these forts really were in international waters. They sat abandoned for almost 2 decades before these radio pirates took control of them. So, nobody really cared about them until this pirate radio phenomenon happened. And again, all of the kind of battling out there that was required for it to allow these individual stations to hold on to their forts.
Yeah. That's so weird. Yeah, they're like just sitting there empty, and then they become like pretty valuable, basically. You need one.
Almost like priceless to a certain degree, because it's like, how many freestanding, sturdy structures in international waters are there that are just sort of ripe for the taking? And so, that really part of what, sort of solidified Roy Bates's reputation as a tough guy was the length that he and his crews would go to not only hold on to their fort, but take over. Long story short, they eventually took over a second fort that would become Sealand, and the wherewithal it took to do that was pretty remarkable, and lots of bloodied lips and black eyes, and even use of a flamethrower and Molotov cocktails in these battles. So again, it was like kind of a fun adventure, but also the stakes were pretty high. And again, the British government recognized that, which is kind of made the whole thing snowball into something a bit more serious.
Right. Yeah. No, these guys were they were hardcore about keeping these things and protecting them. Okay. Yeah. So Roy Bates, he decides to open up start his pirate radio called Radio Essex, and he does it on one of the forts called Knock John, right?
Right.
Okay. And then so he gets that actually up and running, but then what happens to that?
And so ultimately, he is fined for broadcasting because it was determined that this fort was just squeaked by the 3-mile limit. So it was within British territory. So he was fined and punished for that. And so that led him to look at Ruff's Tower, which would become Sealand, because that was almost 7 miles out to sea, irrefutably in international waters. And so that was even more valuable than Knockjohn, because it was truly in international waters, which, once Radio Essex's original location was shut down, they sailed out to Ruff's Tower and took it over. And again, a fairly impressive show of force. And so that's how they ended up on the fort that would become Sealand.
Yeah. So there was somebody else occupying Ruff's Tower at the time, but they just kind of took it over.
Yep. And the legend goes that these hapless, because again, all these DJs working out there were, 19 to 23, fairly young dudes just living the rock and roll lifestyle. And so in the middle of the night, when these big burly guys just scale the side of this fort while, you're trying to cook dinner on a little tin or, a little heating tin, it's like, oh yeah, that's, okay, sure, you can have it. Just don't throw us over the side. So,
right. Yeah.
But, a lot of people also said that they really, Roy was just such a almost like legendary figure, because taking over one of these forts, all of a sudden he pops up over the side wearing like an immaculate suit like James Bond or something. So just he kind of crafted this legend for himself for being so antagonistic, not only toward other radio pirates but also toward the British government, who quickly kind of zeroed in on him and really tried to put this Ruff's Tower occupation to an end before it got out of hand again.
Right. Yeah. They weren't into having all this stuff going on, even if it was in international waters.
Especially because of that. Yeah, definitely.
Right. Okay. So they get on. He finally gets on Ruff's Tower, but he doesn't actually start another station there, another radio station, does he?
No. By that point, the BBC finally wised up and was like, wait, why don't we just open some more radio stations for more variety? And so that's what they did. They started BBC 2, 3, and 4, which is still, of course, in operation today. And they poached a bunch of the DJs from these pirate radio stations and gave them much better paying jobs. And so the whole radio pirate phenomenon just kind of came to a natural end. And so that around the same time that Roy was going to get another station up and going. So it just wasn't worth it really. But, he did win he was still holding on to this fort. And so that kind of set the stage for whatever would come next out there.
Yeah. So he's kind of got this fort. And then is that when he kind of starts to formulate the idea of Sealand and doing that whole thing?
Yeah. The idea was, he was, again, a patriotic soldier, a war hero. He'd fight in a war again for England as soon as he was called, he would say. So he was a little miffed that the British government was coming down so hard on him for simply trying to, provide for his family and provide, make some money for himself. And so I think, what would become, the idea of starting your own country wasn't necessarily the initial idea, but it was more just like, what can we do to give this fort a bigger footprint, or, kind of throw our power around more. And so naturally, granting it some kind of sovereign status would endow it with that kind of like just power, I guess. So it was just more like, whatever we're going to do next, we're going to give it statehood, and that'll sort of empower us on a larger stage.
Yeah. Yeah. Because what was his motivation or kind of his goal? Like after the whole pirate radio thing kind of went down, why did he even stay on this thing?
And that's of course what I asked his family, was like, what made him so stubborn about turning this into, putting all this blood, sweat, and tears into Sealand, as I'm sure we'll talk about. It was, just another crazy endeavor to get into that's endured to this day. I think it was partly stubbornness, just like, you tell me I can't do this, well, I will do it, by golly. So part of that, but also I think, he was a pretty entrepreneurial guy. So it's like, I have this stable structure in international waters. It's got to be worth something.
Right.
and during the radio pirate area, the British government tried to buy him off the fort, and so he knew it was worth some amount of money. So I think, again, he was just sort of sticking it out until he came across whatever would come next. But I think just sort of out of stubbornness, it was like, fine, I'm going to turn this into my own territory then, and that's naturally sort of led to the idea of Sealand.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I could see that. If you're on that thing in international waters, it's pretty damn rare to have something like that. So there's got to be some sort of opportunity. And
totally.
I mean, yeah, he was always looking fine and stuff, which we'll get into. But okay, so he kind of decides to turn Sealand into its own thing. He decides to turn it into a principality specifically, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what is a principality? How did he decide upon that? What's that whole story?
I believe principality is a fairly outdated form of government by this point, although there still are a few principalities in the world. But it's essentially like a monarchy, just kind of with different titles, again, from my understanding. Mm-hmm. Governed by a prince and princess. There's no king or queen, but they function as such in that they create and enforce all the rules and sort of mold their kingdom according to their worldview. And so that's the idea for principality. We're going to be prince and princess. We're going to have full sovereignty or full reign over this. And so we'll just call it the Principality of Sealand. Right.
Yeah. And so he makes himself the prince and his wife becomes a princess.
Right. Yep. And that's kind of was the family joke, was like, how many people can brag about giving their wives their own their own kingdom and island. And so that, yeah, now they were able to call themselves prince and princess.
Right. Yeah. Man, it's so cool. And they just kind of, if I remember correctly, they picked to do a principality just because it was way easier than trying to set up some other form of jurisdiction or whatever, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you're the kind of first and final word on the law, it's like, yeah, you don't have to waste time with all these levels of government and creating all of these. Of course, they do have a constitution, but yeah, it just greatly simplified getting things up and running.
Right. Yeah, and so what was the process to get things up and running? Is it like do you submit an application to something, or what's the deal with that?
Well, I mean, of course, he consulted with his lawyer to see what their legal, what legal right they had to do this, and that's kind of what's made Sealand a lot different than other, experiments in nationhood or micronationhood.
Right.
Is that it does on paper for sure have a pretty interesting claim to sovereignty. And so that slight ambivalence, the fact that it is in international waters, that it was abandoned, that it's, essentially a permanent structure, kind of gives it a little more latitude to make some kind of claim about it versus something that might be a little less permanent. And so there is a pretty interesting academic exercise when you consider what makes a state and how Sealand fulfills the qualifications that are generally applied to other recognized nations. So, there's a lot of academic debate about that. I came across a bunch of cool scholarly articles, getting really serious about debates about Sealand's nationhood, both claims for and against, and, citing, just really antiquated case law and all kinds of other stuff to try to make heads or tails of what this, what status this old fort actually has.
Yeah, like what the hell is this thing? I mean, that's kind of really the trick, is to kind of get other people or other nations to recognize Sealand as a nation, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
And as soon as this notion that Sealand was declared, which by the way was September 2nd, 1967 is Sealand's Independence Day, and there's a flag raising ceremony, and friends and supporters and family were on the fort to inaugurate the country. The British government, very quickly dismissed this claim of sovereignty, but the Sealanders nonetheless got to work, issuing stamps and coins and other trappings of statehood, and then trying to engage with other governments to try to gain some kind of recognition, governments both recognized and of other disputed territories.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And so, I mean, well, initially the people just living on Sealand are Roy Bates and his wife, and then their 2 children, right?
That's right.
Yeah. So they're the citizens of Sealand to start.
Yeah, and they, some of the crew from the Radio Pirate days stayed on and became Sealanders and helped get the project up and running. And I definitely should point out how critical Princess Joan, Roy's wife Joan, was in getting not only the Sealand going, but also the radio stations, because she was definitely, an organizational presence and very, very smart in a business sense and very helpful and just sort of, coordinating all the crazy stuff that was required to run an offshore radio station and then her own country. And then, of course, acclimating to living out in the middle of the notoriously rough sea with wind just slamming into this place all the time and, water freezing when it got cold and, really just putting up with all of that for years until it got to be a relatively comfortable place to live. And same with the kids, too. I mean, they would, once you're out there, you're kind of at the mercy of the weather. And if the weather turns, you're kind of stuck until it gets better. And so they, were out there for weeks past when they were supposed to be initially picked up, to the point where they had to distill seawater and mix it with just flour to make something edible. And so, I mean, there were, it was not, it's kind of a romantic notion, but that's what Penny Bates, who is Roy and Joan's oldest kid, their first daughter, said, like, she used to hate it. She would just wish on the way out there, she wished she would, some tragedy would befall them so they wouldn't have to stay out there. But, it also definitely kind of toughened them up, and they look back on that experience now as, a pretty unique childhood and something, not a lot of people have gotten to experience. So, although they might not have thought so at the time, it definitely is made for pretty worthwhile and adventure-filled life.
Right. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So, I mean, so obviously, this thing was rough as a fort living on here, and then it's been abandoned for 20 years and everything, and now they're on here living there, for weeks at a time. Like you said, what are the living conditions like on this thing? Like, what are their utilities like? How do they get water? All that stuff.
Fortunately, they had, some of the people who helped out with the Radio Pirate era were pretty mechanically inclined. And so they got these not antique, I guess, they're from World War II at the time, these diesel generators up and running. But I mean, it was nothing short of a pretty miserable place to be for quite a while. Because again, you're at the mercy of the weather. It's freezing cold and windy and rainy all the time. It wasn't sealed up properly. And I mean, even today, it's a big concrete and metal structure. It's certainly not very, geared for cold weather. But, little by little, they brought cooking, kitchen appliances, beds, sofas, books, just whatever you have, whatever you would need to make it a little more habitable. And so, they could stop passing out due to the cold and, have a little less rough go of it. So, gradually to the point where it's at today, where it's, the kitchen is indistinguishable from that of any in a, nice home. And they have workout equipment and the internet and furnished bedrooms and stuff like that. So, took a lot of work for sure, but gradually it became a little more comfortable place to be. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So here's kind of like, is this what the kitchen looked like when you were there, or is this older?
No, that's essentially it. And that picture to your left of the living room with the wood stove, the one below that.
Oh, that one right there. Yeah,
yeah. I actually took that photo. So
did you?
That's just as you can see, there's that wood stove in the background, some plush couches and TVs and books and movies and stuff like that. A fan if you need it. So
right, yeah. I mean, just looking at this, it just looks like, kind of a regular, maybe a little rinky-dink, but just kind of a living room, family room type of thing.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of, the whole thing struck me as like, if you it's kind of like a furnished like cellar, like where it's, you know, it's definitely not cozy necessarily in a traditional sense, but it's not uncomfortable either. It's just like, yeah, kind of like you're in a nice basement, really.
Right. Yeah. Man. And then so were all the bedrooms in? Did they sleep in those columns then too?
Yeah. There's you know, the Prince's various rooms throughout there. There's a guest room. There's rooms for the caretaker that they've outfitted kind of to their liking. I mean, you know, that one of the caretakers, Mike, was telling me, you know, he'll see like cool pieces of art at a yard sale and be like, oh, wow, that'll look great in my room in Sealand. And, you know, getting old, you know, just kind of leftovers from like construction projects and using those to, you know, for Sealand too. I mean, it's kind of patched together, but it all looks cool. And again, it's definitely not an uncomfortable place to be for the most part.
Right. Yeah. Cool. Okay. And then so they have their generators for power and stuff. And then how do they get like potable water? Do they have to just bring that on?
Oh, right. Yeah. It's all their food, drinking water, all the amenities they need, everything has to be brought out on a boat or by helicopter, but that's generally prohibitively expensive. But yeah, I mean, when the caretakers go out there, they'll bring, you know, 2 to 3 weeks worth of food and booze and water and stuff, because that's really the only way you're going to get it. Though they, of course, have, you know, a cellar that's stocked with, you know, non-perishable goods for quite a while. But yeah, I mean, yeah, everything they, you know, drinkable water definitely needs to be brought out there.
Right. Man, oh man. And then do they have, I mean, I guess like all their trash and sewer and stuff too? What do they do with all that?
I believe the toilet flushes into the ocean, so that, you know, there's that kind of takes care of that. But yeah, I would expect that all their garbage and, you know, stuff just goes back with them.
Okay. Yeah. Makes sense.
When they go back to shore. Yeah. Trade off.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Because they didn't really live on here full time. They still had a house, you know, on shore, right?
Well, I mean, Roy, you know, again, touching on his stubbornness, I mean, he would live out there for months at a time, like just for the sheer doggedness of it. And Michael Bates, I think, said his longest consecutive stretch was 6 months, and then an estimated, you know, 20 cumulative years of his life spent out on the fort. So they put some serious time in out there for sure.
Right.
They don't live, the caretakers live out there, you know, switching ideally 2-week shifts. But yeah, the Sealandic family will spend some time out there, but they don't live out there because they're fishermen in England. They have their own fishing and canning business, and, you know, spouses and kids and, you know, everything that they need to take care of. And back in the UK. Right.
Sure. Well, yeah. And then you mentioned caretakers. They always had somebody on here just to, you know, take care of it, but also because, like, at least in the early days, people were trying to take this thing away from them all the time. Right.
Yeah. I mean, it never really lost its, you know, value for people who, you know, saw a business opportunity out there. So yeah, I mean, somebody had to be out there all the time to fend off invaders and make sure, you know, it stayed in the Bates family's hands.
Right. Yeah. Because with the first kind of incident was what England was saying they needed to destroy it or something like that.
Yeah, there were all kinds of raids and ideas for taking over the fort hatched by the British government. I mean, you know, involving like Marines going out in boats and helicopters swarming the place. And, you know, they tried to get a former radio associate to you know, in a very clandestine maneuver, take over the fort. So they were very serious about getting the Bates off of there because they just saw it as nothing but a problem and would only grow to be more of a problem. So that was kind of a surprising thing I uncovered in my research, was just how serious they were or how seriously they considered this threat and the lengths they were prepared to go to get them off there. But they, eventually kind of realized like somebody's going to get hurt, if not killed, whether it's somebody from the Sealanders or somebody from the British government. So they eventually kind of backed off of their, really trying hard to get them off.
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah. And like, because they're the kids, even like Michael Bates, they're walking around with guns on their hips all the time. Right.
Yeah. And I mean, they've had no bones about shooting warning shots at people or, waving around a pistol if somebody was getting too close. So yeah, based on, how aggressive some invaders had been in the past, I mean, they took all of that pretty seriously.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's crazy. And then so how do you, because looking at that thing, it's so high up in the air. How do you get on and off of that platform?
Originally, there was this, it looked kind of like scaffolding built on the outside. It was like, a set of stairs, zigzag stairs that you could hop off a boat and climb up. That's long since rusted away. And so the only way on Sealand for the past few decades, aside from a helicopter, is they have a mechanical winch up top that lowers like what looks like a little wooden swing down at you. And so you kind of have to gently hop from a, moving boat onto this swing, and they just bring you right up top. And then one of the caretakers is up there, and they have a rope attached to the end of it that they swing you back onto the deck. So it's about just over a minute long ride. It's kind of like a carnival ride where you're just kind of at the mercy of this machine and high up in the air, but very beautiful views, and it's quite peaceful.
Right.
And not nearly as scary as it looks, but I mean that again, I mean, if the weather's bad, you can't be doing that in rough seas. So, yeah.
Jesus. And that's what you did. You got to do that thing?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Man. God, that's so funny. They just lift you up on a seat.
Yeah. And the interesting thing is like, the boat, like, so we sailed out there on this rickety old lobster boat. And these fishermen were going on their way past Sealand to get their lobsters. And so they were dropping off the caretaker. They have the system worked out. And, they get close enough for you to get on the swing. But as soon as you're on, they start sailing away because the current, they don't want to get pushed into these huge columns.
Right.
And so, you're up in the air and the boat's like gone. So you're just like looking straight down on the water. And it, just does like a little circle around Sealand to prepare the next person to go up. But yeah, I mean, you're just dangling there for a little while. And not frequently, but it has broken before, leaving people, kind of like stranded while they fix it. But yeah, my ride was pretty seamless and no problems there.
Right. Man, I love that. It just seems so funny, but I mean, it makes sense. Practical.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then they have their own, how did they come across the name Sealand? How did they pick that?
It's about, there is no real explanation. It's land in the sea. It's
that's what it is.
Just a simple, straightforward name, and that's that. Yeah.
Okay. It's fair enough, I guess. Easy to remember too. And they have their flag. They made their flag basically right when they kind of, announced Sealand, right?
Yeah, and the cover of the book is from that flag raising that initial Independence Day flag raising ceremony, and the flag, they had a local sailmaker make this nice flag for them. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then they made a little bit of their own currency too, didn't they?
Yeah, there have been various Sealand coins minted in various denominations throughout the years. And I think as soon as 1968 or 69, so a year or two after it was founded, they issued silver coins. So yeah, I got to work right away doing that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, what were they doing with that stuff? What were they buying?
I think, they certainly wouldn't have turned down the opportunity to use that as in some kind of real transaction. Right. I think, it was to raise money for Sealand, but as far as they issued their first stamps around the same time, within a year or two of its founding. And the idea, they were very serious about trying to use these stamps to enter the, kind of global postal stream. And so they worked out this plan with a guy from Belgium who flew to Sealand in a helicopter, picked up the first bag of Sealandic mail with Sealandic stamps, and he was going to take it back to Belgium to kind of surreptitiously put it into the Belgian postal service and then distribute it, throughout the world. And,
sure.
Some letters were slipped through the cracks, but that didn't quite go unnoticed. So unfortunately, you can't really use Sealand stamps like that these days, but they did certainly try, make a genuine effort to try to pull that off.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that would look good. I mean, if people are accepting your stamps, you must be a sovereign nation, right?
Yeah. And that's, it's like while they're waiting for, recognition from, Germany perhaps, or South Africa or something, they're also trying to pull off these smaller scale bits of recognition, whether it be stamps or using currency or something like that.
Right. Yeah. And then, it's kind of jumping ahead, but now they sell that's the thing too that shocked me is they're still around today.
Right. Yeah.
So
and that's what's so compelling for sure. 53 years. Yeah.
Yeah. So you kind of see this and just think it's kind of like, 60s, people were crazy back then and they just did it for a couple of years,
Right.
But they've been around for over 50 years. It's crazy.
Yeah. And Prince Michael started hanging out on the radio station when he was, 12, 13, 14. So every era of his own life has been also involved with Sealand. So, he grew up with Sealand from a very early age. And that's what's been kind of cool to see too. Just, each decade kind of has its own theme and tone, if you will. And that's reflected in the pictures. And you see, Michael as a kid, you see him as a kind of scrappy 20-year-old, he gets married and has his own kids. And again, that's all kind of chronicled, in conjunction with Sealand's own history as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, Michael's the son of Roy Bates, if we can mention that for people listening. But yeah, Michael kind of really, really embraced this, but their daughter just wasn't super into it, huh?
Yeah, and that's what, she's like, and it was, fortunately enough, I was able to speak with her. Her name's Penny. She's 70 now, and she's like, I don't blame myself. She's like, I was 18, 19 years old. I don't want to stay on this cold piece of concrete when I could be doing whatever it is, 20-year-olds do. That's,
yeah, right.
But again, I think we talked about this earlier, I think looking back on it, she's definitely kind of proud of her unique upbringing and was glad to put in the time that she did, but, quickly realized that standing out there with a shotgun defending this fort was not the life she wanted to lead necessarily.
You're right. Yeah. Yeah. It's so unique, man. I bet it's fun to reflect on that and look back at that you had that as a child, or that was your experience growing up and stuff. And you could probably feel proud of it even, I would imagine. But yeah, maybe the actual experience and day-to-dayness of it is not quite so fun.
Yeah. Yeah. One of those character building things that it's hard to find the value in at the time for sure.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And then, so they kind of always had Roy always kind of had ideas and plans to develop Sealand or different ventures to make money on that thing. Right.
Yeah. And that was, again, sort of the idea from the beginning. It's like, how can we build this up more and more, and what opportunities are available for us? And there are ideas to turn it into a hotel or a way station for travelers or just some other kind of venture. And so that's how they eventually got into this partnership with some Germans and Dutchmen to do just that, turn it into expand its footprint, turn it into something bigger. And in fact, there's oil wells out in the North Sea. And so there was some thought there that is this area of the North Sea where Sealand is, could we drill for oil there? And
Sure.
The answer is no. It's not a particularly oil-rich part of the sea, but that was like something that was considered. And so that, the 70s were characterized at first by some really concerted efforts by the Sealanders and their German friends to gain recognition and really elevate its status in the international community. And the Germans, I guess, drawing on that stereotype of German efficiency, just bombarded the government of every country in the world and the UN with diplomatic missives and attempts at mutual recognition and stuff like that. And so I think that was certainly a lot of work for the Bates family to take on top of their other concerns. So initially this partnership was pretty worthwhile. And for a couple of years, it seemed like, we're in this together to turn this into the next, whatever comes next, this next big thing.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Because you can just looking at that thing. You would just start to, your imagination just goes of let's turn this into a sweet hotel with this ocean view, and we could get a casino out there, all this stuff.
Yeah. Take advantage of international waters, fairly, kind of governed only by your own preferences, I guess.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's just so fun to kind of think of what you could do. And of course, that's what they were all thinking of. But then, so the German investors kind of come on, but what's the story of that? How does that play out?
Well, as mentioned, at first it seemed like a pretty fruitful partnership. But what the Bates family didn't know at the time was that a lot of these Germans were straight up con men who had, been facing all kinds of other charges, unrelated charges in their home countries. Definitely some slippery characters. And so that eventually kind of came to light. And, when the British government too realized they're not just trying to build this up, they're trying to perhaps turn this into some kind of offshore banking endeavor or some kind of tax haven of dubious legality. And so, the Germans had grander plans than what they wanted, the Bates family involved with. So they eventually launched a gambit to take over the fort for themselves.
Right. Yeah. And that's kind of the big, one of the big incidents there where Michael got kidnapped, right?
Yeah. And that's a pivotal event in Sealand history. In 1978, he was out there by himself. Long story short, a helicopter lands with some of the Germans that he recognized, from his parents working with before, but they quickly locked him in this iron closet and then eventually tied him up, beat him up, and dropped him off in Holland without any money or a passport. Jesus. And took over the fort for themselves. And so Michael had to make his way back to the UK, tell his parents what had happened. And at first, they were very upset with him for not putting up more of a fight to hold on to the fort. But once they kind of got over that initial shock, they got together some tough guys and staged their own counter coup to this attempted German takeover.
Right. Yeah. To me, it makes sense, but to me, it's just, it's pretty remarkable how brute force it is, where these guys are just coming in and, just literally capture and kidnap Michael and take over the fort, and take over Sealand.
And, I think it's something that you kind of, I guess, would gradually get acclimated to. You get into some fist fights when you're running this radio station, and then more invaders come and you have to shoot at them, and then you get kidnapped. And so it kind of just naturally, the next step was we got to take the fort back over. So of course we're going to do that. And as it happened, Roy knew a guy who was a stunt helicopter pilot who'd been in some James Bond movies. And so they had a helicopter at their disposal. They gathered up a couple of hunting rifles and a shotgun and some wartime pistols that Roy had dismantled and hidden at his mom's house. And they stayed, in the wee morning hours. They flew low on the horizon as to, hide themselves. And all of a sudden, out of a movie, this helicopter rises up, these avenging angels tumble out of the sides with a shotgun tied around their neck, and they were successful in taking these Germans back over and in turn taking them hostage.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I could just imagine Roy Bates just love that,
Oh yeah. I mean, Michael still lights up when he talks about that. I mean, I can't imagine, who gets a chance to do something like that. And, they said also that the pilot was just beside himself because he was actually involved in a real raid this time, not just like for a movie. So, everybody involved just was able to just celebrate the joy of this insane adventure they were getting into.
Yeah, man, it's just so great. My face is hurting because I'm just smiling so much talking about this story. It's so fun.
Yeah.
And then like you said, they took them hostage after that. Specifically the guy Achenbach, right? They made him stay on Sealand with them or something.
Yeah, Alexander Achenbach was kind of the mastermind behind this, but he only actually ever set foot on the fort once. It was his second in command, a guy whose last name was Putz, P-U-T-Z, Putz, which was kind of a nice coincidence. But he had, he was kind of considered the ringleader for this attempted coup. And so while the other guys involved, they were kind of negotiated their release. Since Putz had been issued a passport, he was especially guilty of treason, and so they sentenced him to 6 months hard labor on Sealand and an $18,000 fine. But fortunately, he was, he had to make the coffee and clean the toilets and stuff. They didn't treat him too badly or anything like that. And eventually, this actually proved very beneficial for Sealand's status as a sovereign entity, because a member of the German embassy in the UK actually flew out to Sealand to see what was going on with these kidnapped German countrymen. Right. And so, it was argued that an official diplomatic operative from another government made a point to go out to Sealand to negotiate on a country-to-country level. And so that kind of spoke for, because the Germans tried to approach the British government. The British government said, hey, that's not our problem. They're out in the international waters. So hence the German government going out to speak with Sealanders directly, which many argue, and I would incline to agree that does qualify as some kind of recognition. So that worked out, although it was kind of a roundabout way to do it, that did work out sort of in favor of Sealand's sovereignty, or at least some notion of independence.
Right. Yeah. So they're saying, this German diplomat was here and negotiating with us on a country to country level. So we must be a nation then.
Right. And of course, other people have argued official government agents negotiate with all kinds of different groups, but that doesn't make them sovereign necessarily. But again, sort of given the other considerations that go into Sealand's claims for statehood, they're, all taken together, it is a somewhat unique and different case that, you could very easily at least make the argument that this did constitute some kind of serious recognition. Yeah,
I'll buy it. I'll take it.
Yeah, no, check the box for me, so I'm into it for sure.
Yeah, why not? But this was interesting to me, is they've had issues with kind of counterfeit passports and different things like that. And they even had a website that was selling that kind of stuff that they had no idea existed.
And this is definitely one of my favorite aspects of the Sealand story, that this foiled coup involving these Germans eventually blossomed into not only an exile government based in Germany, headed by this Achenbach character initially, but and we can talk about this later, but they're essentially not kind of Aryan mystics on the search for this mystical energy source, and that's all has to do with Sealand, and that's a whole other weird part of the story. But yeah, as mentioned, these Germans were pretty accomplished con artists, and so over the succeeding decades, themselves and their associates issued bootleg Sealand passports, doctorates, all kinds of different titles, and various official bits of official documentation that they sold to people around the world. And so they had this whole cottage industry that really took advantage of Sealand's status as a sovereign entity, for their own ends, to again, kind of traffic on their name and their officialhood and what they'd accomplished. And the Sealandic family was totally unaware of all of this and had no part in these scams, but it just kind of, again, proved in a roundabout way how successful Sealand had been in advocating for its own statehood when this group of criminals was able to rip off countless people, again, with this veneer of official Sealandom.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Because they were selling, like all kinds of stuff like passports and doctorates, like you said. So, you could see how you could take advantage of them so much by just kind of these like under the radar almost, but official documents that people haven't really seen. But how could you question it, I guess?
Yeah. They were even using, trying to use, portray themselves as Sealandic government officials as collateral to get loans to buy like private planes. And they were trying to coordinate the purchase and sale of like missiles from the Russian mafia to sell to Sudan. So it got like, there's some pretty serious, it wasn't just selling fake documents. There was some serious shit, which again, that's just so fascinating to me. I'm kind of partial to crime stories, but that was just like, the breadth and scope of this going on again without the true Sealanders' knowledge was pretty impressive.
Yeah.
And they were clued into all this, the fact that all this was going on in 1997 when the Gianni Versace, the fashion designer, was gunned down by this psychopath, and the psychopath in turn committed suicide in a houseboat. And in that houseboat was a Sealandic passport, because the houseboat was owned by somebody who claimed to be a diplomat from Sealand, who was almost certainly related to these sketchy Germans. So, Sealanders like just read in the newspapers that they're being associated with the tragic murder of Gianni Versace, and they're just like, whoa, what the hell's going on? And then eventually kind of learn the whole scope of this, and we're just completely aghast that people were using Sealand's sort of noble name for these like horrible purposes.
Right. Yeah. Jesus, man. And then, can we talk? You mentioned it, so let's just jump back to it about the government in exile and Achenbach and what these guys were thinking. I think they were. This whole like passport scam thing sort of is indicative of their mindset. It's like, how can we use this to benefit ourselves and make money? I think it was more just like, however we can use Sealand for our own purposes, great. And that, that kind of ties into their Achenbach's past as document forger. He was caught up in this huge German document scam in the 70s, which is what I mentioned earlier that the Bates weren't aware of. So this was kind of old hat for him. Sure.
But, his associates got even weirder, and the prime minister of the government in exile of Sealand is like an even more just like off the wall, just seems like kind of a sociopath almost, just one of those people that's like incapable of incapable of telling the truth and just always sort of having all these fantastical stories. And so that's who heads up the Sealandic government in exile, who have also petitioned, nations around the world for recognition, but their whole reason for being is much weirder. They definitely kind of advocate for Sealand statehood, but it's kind of in service of using it as a home base to like channel what they call Vril, VRIL, this mystical energy source. Yeah. They claim to sell these machines that channel Vril that kind of lead to limitless energy for everyone. And it's just this real, and, you know, like I of course wrote to the government in exile, and, you know, they said, if you send us $5,000, you know, we'll get you hooked up with this drill generator. And I was like, you know, I don't have that, you know, thanks, but no, but, you know, I'd still like to talk to you. And they're amenable to that. And then, you know, when I'm over in the UK, I was certainly planning on hopping on a plane to go to Germany to talk to this dude. And, you know, a few days before, they're like, yeah, just give us a $10,000 down payment, and, you know, we'll show you how Vril powers an army tank. And, you know, if I had unlimited funds, I would have, yeah, all right, here, let's just see what happens, just for the sake of it. But unfortunately, I wasn't in a position to give them $10,000 to maybe just for who knows what purposes. So, you know, if anybody wants to fund that project, please get in touch with me, because I would happily write a sequel to it that, you know, kind of tracks all this down.
Yeah, God, what would they? First of all, I mean, there's probably no demonstration you get to see anyway. But man, if they, whatever they would show, I would love to see what they're able to do. Man, that would be so funny.
Oh yeah, I mean, you know, this leader of the government in exile is he lives on this weird old chicken farm that has all these leftover Russian military pieces from World War II. And so I, like, you know, had maps of how to get to this guy's house. Like, a friend in Germany was going to go with me to translate. Like, I was like ready to do this, but you know, like, again, it just kind of didn't come together. So eventually I would like to do that. And Prince Michael has also said, like, you know, people have pitched that idea to him, because they've, you know, he's never met anyone from the exile government and vice versa. So what would happen if he just knocks on the guy's door one day and, you know, kind of confronts him? So, you know, I would love to get that going and tag along on that adventure for sure.
Right. Oh man, the story's just never ending. And then, so yeah, we're kind of at like the late 90s, we're hitting the 2000s, and that's when, like, you know, the tech boom starting to happen and the internet's coming around. And then, so that's the idea to have Sealand kind of become like a data haven starts to show up, right? Where what they called it Haven Co, and they're keeping servers there and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, because at that point, as you mentioned, you know, the internet was just starting to kind of become a part of everyone's daily life, but there weren't really rules written yet for how that works between governments and internationally and stuff. And so, given Sealand's arguably sovereign status, this group of kind of these libertarian cyberpunks wrote to the Sealandic government, pitched this idea of not really pirate internet, but certainly kind of in the same ideological headspace of using Sealand as you would like a tax haven, except for internet data. So you could host websites out there, like gambling websites or pornography or whatever that might be illegal in your home country, but since it's in international waters, you could kind of skirt the restrictions that prevent you from doing that kind of thing. And so that really caught on with the Bates family, again, hearkening the pirate radio era that helped launch Sealand. And so the beginning of the millennium was characterized by this pretty groundbreaking and technological endeavor, which did get a lot of people paying attention because it was in uncharted territory as far as international internet law and data storage and stuff goes. So it was a pretty interesting experiment that a lot of people, you know, were very interested in, and it seemed like it was definitely going to be a pretty lucrative and influential endeavor.
Yeah, but that just kind of what happened. What was the outcome of that? It's kind of fall through.
Well, it got so much attention that the Haven Co people setting it up were essentially spending all of their time doing interviews and stuff. And so, you know, and flying back and forth in helicopters, which was extremely expensive, and outfitting the place with all these servers and technology. And so, you know, they kind of, I think if they would approach it from a little more experience from a business perspective, they might have been able to do something with it. But I think it just kind of imploded under its own its own weight. I mean, like they had technological problems that far out to sea, like their internet link ups and satellites stopped working. Like,
yeah,
it just kind of a lot of small things added up, and it just didn't really get off the ground, and they kind of burned through all of their seed money very quickly. And I mean, you know, they had a bunch of customers, including the government of Tibet, I think, and some mostly gambling websites. But yeah, unfortunately, I think they just it was just too big to actually pull off, and it kind of just quietly fell off.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think something too that as we're kind of talking about this, it's like the Bates family, they weren't like criminals or bad people or anything. Like they just kind of had, like, they weren't the ones doing the forging of the passports or anything like that. They were just they loved the idea of like pirate radio though, where,
right.
You know, there was just kind of the freedom to do what you wanted. And that's kind of what Sealand and the Bates family stood for, was that kind of mission statement, really, right?
Yeah. It's like principled freedom, I guess, in the sense that, you know, you kind of shrug off these needless government restrictions, but you're not using that for any sketchy purposes. I mean, you know, Roy was this honorable old English gentleman, so, you know, he's kind of coming from that perspective for sure, where he's not, you know, using Sealand to, you know, he's challenging these, what he sees as pointless laws, but it's not like they're trying to use Sealand to, like, you know, again, bootleg passports or like kill people or stuff like that.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, and then I mean, they've had so many endeavors on related to Sealand and their family and everything. But yeah, they were gonna try to get Sealand TV going, like broadcast some TV off there, right?
Yeah, they tried to do that. They were gonna, you know, they tried to register ships, like their what's that term? Ships fly a flag wherever they're registered, and they were trying to do that with Sealand to, you know, again, grant it some more official recognition. And yeah, I mean, all kinds of just sort of minor business projects throughout the years. Fortunately, now Princes Liam and James, who are Prince Michael's sons, who are millennials, you know, they're pretty internet savvy, and so that's given a rebirth to Sealand's recognition and reputation, because it's allowed a lot more people to learn about it and then become supporters. And, you know, fortunately, kind of for Roy's dreams, Sealand is now a self-sustaining operation through the sale of royal titles and various other bits of merchandise.
Yeah.
For the first time ever, you know, over the past few years, they haven't been pouring their own savings or mortgaging their houses or selling furniture as they've done throughout the years to keep Sealand afloat. You know, they're able to pay these two full-time caretakers and pay for the upkeep of the fort, which is, you know, unfortunately something Roy didn't get to see in his lifetime, but it's definitely doing justice to his ambitions.
Right. Yeah. No, it's very cool. Yeah, because they've got their own website now where you can literally buy they have like mugs and T-shirts and all that kind of stuff, but you can become like a baron of Sealand or something. Oh yeah,
different levels of nobility for different prices. Yeah, yeah. Duke is what, $650.
Yeah.
Whereas Lord, Lady, or Baroness is only $45. So yeah, depending on.
Man, that's so
what you want to do. And there's a huge and growing Sealand citizen community where it's people who've bought titles and kind of all get together to celebrate this cool secondary citizenship. And so, yeah, I mean, there's supporters all over the world. There's, you know, always news stories about us in all kinds of languages. And it's definitely grown in reputation.
Yeah. Look at that. I could get like Travis at sealandlord.org. I could get an email. Man.
I've certainly thought about getting my own handle there. I just haven't taken the plunge yet. But I do have one of the little desktop flags on my desk. So, always in my heart.
Yeah, there you go. Oh man, I love this. This is just so cool. It's so fun, so cool. And I'm glad that it's actually, supporting them and they're able to do that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you could get a knighthood from Sealand. God, that's going to be that may have to be a gift to someone this year.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I definitely have given my mom Sealand stamps. She's a big stamp fan, so add these micronational stamps to the collection.
Yeah, there you go. Man. And then, geez, what else should we talk about? There's so much. Yeah, it seems like, of course, like they're going to make a movie out of this, but that's been in the works, so they've tried a bit, but there's nothing really yet, is there?
No, and I think it's come close. I mean, there have been scripts, there have been, directors interested and things like that. Just for whatever reason, I don't know the ins and outs of Hollywood, but, just has never gotten off the ground. I know that they are currently in some sort of discussion for that. So hopefully a Sealand project will see the light of day at some point. I think, yeah, I mean, almost everyone I've talked to about this or, who knows about Sealand is like, this is like an incredibly cinematic story. Like, why the hell isn't there a TV show or a movie yet? And so someday, hopefully it will. And that's why Sealanders said they can't talk about my book is because they've kind of using their own book as the basis for this possible movie. So unfortunately, that's why I haven't, we haven't done any joint publicity or something, unfortunately.
I see. Oh yeah, that'd be cool, man. But yeah, it seems inevitable that this is going to turn into a movie at some point.
Yeah, and that's what I kind of was saying. I was like, if you can just get me a background role as a German that gets beaten up or something, or just like,
yeah, right.
I would love to just, play some small part in that. And at the very least, just seeing it on the bigger, small screen will be super cool someday.
Yeah, that'd be great. And then, we got to talk about their like Sealand athletics a bit too, because they have a soccer team even.
Yeah, they've played in some charity soccer matches, with some mid-level celebrities joining their ranks and the Sealand princes taking part. And people have climbed huge mountains, Mount Everest, was in Sealand's name. People have won martial arts tournaments in the name of Sealand. So it's been cool to see just how many people are interested in showing their support and bringing Sealand's name to a larger stage. And so yeah, I mean, sports kind of popular and obscure alike. There have been someone competing on behalf of Sealand.
Right. Yeah. So cool, man. Well, damn, Dylan. Go ahead.
And that was one cool thing another thing I've learned in my research is that there are these soccer leagues for disputed territories or, minority populations and stuff. So Sealand has, taken part in these in these tournaments with just these teams made up of really cool people from all over the world.
Right. Yeah. No, that's cool. That's because it's kind of like a thing where these teams that aren't recognized by like FIFA or something can kind of come and join this, right? Right.
Yeah. Like other territories of kind of disputed status, or the Romani people, I think, have a team, and there's like a team representing this like brief Hungarian entity that existed for like one day in like the 1930s or something like that. Just all kinds of cool teams and leagues. So yeah, that's something else to explore at some other point.
Right. Yeah. So what do you think is the future of Sealand?
I asked Prince Liam about that, who again, one of Prince Michael's sons, who's in his early 30s, and the idea of cryptocurrency obviously is pretty kind of runs hand in hand with what Sealand's about. So some kind of Sealandic cryptocurrency or something else involved with the internet might be in the works. The idea of I don't know if digital citizenship is the right word, but, really kind of elevating what this Sealandic sort of association means and kind of making something a little more out of that.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely a sense of optimism in Sealand because, again, the internet has kind of given new life to the Sealandic story, and certainly expanded its supporters. So I think, fortunately, now there's enough interest and finances that they are able to undertake some bigger endeavors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's great. I'm excited to see kind of where they go and what they do, and it's just so cool to hear that the story that's started in the 60s is still going on. It's still in the same family. These, the Prince, what's their names now? The two princes? James and Liam, that they're still, on board and seem to be, kind of following in the footsteps, at least for now. It's cool. It's great to hear.
Yeah. I mean, 53 years is no joke, especially for something as difficult to maintain as this. So yeah, I'm very glad that this is still going on, and that, the Sealand this story is not over yet by any means.
Yeah. No, very cool. So, and I mean, this was awesome. Thanks, Dylan. I love hearing this story. Thanks for your book.
Yeah,
it's great.
Of course.
So we'll mention your book. It's called Sealand, the true story of the world's most stubborn micronation and its eccentric royal family. Anywhere specific we should send people to grab a copy of that?
I mean, any online retailer should have it. Your local bookstore should be able to order it. I've even seen it pop up in random library collections all over the country, so that's cool. But yeah, I mean, it's a very findable book. So just type in Sealand book, and you should be able to pull that up.
Okay, cool. Well, great. Yeah, I'll have a link to Amazon or some other places where people can grab that for folks listening. But thanks, man, for sharing the story and for writing the book. I really appreciate what you do. So thank you. Yeah,
likewise. I mean, definitely the breadth of topics covered on your podcast is, something after my own heart. I appreciate the deep curiosity on all kinds of different stuff. I was just listening to, auto racing for novices, or whatever the title of that was. And it's like, I don't know anything about racing. Like, this is a great thing to just learn about. So yeah, I appreciate you doing that as well. Yeah, I will plug real quick my own blog, which is theyawningchasm.com, and that's compilation of all stuff I've written. I'm a staff writer at this cool website called Narratively that publishes all kinds of long form journalism. So stories about possible UFO threats at a solar observatory, strange true crimes, a treasure hunter kind of cursed by his own success. So please feel free to check that out, theyawningchasm.com. And I'm also on Instagram at Shakespeare_sucks. So feel free to follow me on that.
Okay, sweet. No, thanks for sharing that. I'll have links to both those too for people listening. Shakespeare sucks. Nice. Okay.
Slightly. I'm not no Shakespeare fan, but not just sort of tongue in cheek and an obnoxious name. So no offense to all Shakespeare scholars out there.
Sure. Yeah, I love it. Cool, man. Thanks again, Dylan. Thanks for coming on. Appreciate your time, and enjoy your rest of your day and your weekend.
Absolutely. Likewise. Thank you again very much.
And that's episode 94. Told you it was good. It was a fun story, right? Sealand's awesome. Such a good story. Can't wait for it to turn into a movie. Got to think who could play Roy Bates and Michael Bates. There's got to be some good casting that'll happen. But thank you so much to Dylan for coming on and sharing that story and doing all that deep dive research that he did for his book. Again, we'll have a link to his book and everything that he mentioned in the description for you to click on. Thank you to you, the listener, for being here, listening to this. Hope you enjoyed it. Maybe you know somebody who loves these stories like this of independence and nationalism and everything. And if you do, maybe send them this episode. Maybe they'd enjoy listening to it, like hopefully you did. I'm Travis. You can send me an email, travis@curiosityness.com. I'm on Instagram at TravDeRose. And I think that's all I have to say. I think that's the end of the episode. So thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And I'll see you in episode 95.